January roundtable. I'm glad you could all make it. And if you're able, I'd like to ask you to join me in standing to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So today is a bit special in terms of our meeting format. We do tend to alternate between a business meeting and a work session where we have presentations and discussions. This will be a bit different tonight. But before we continue, I just would like to ask, could I get a motion to accept tonight's agenda? I guess not.
So moved.
All right, David, and who is the second? Second. Maria, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Before we get going, I just have an announcement a statement to share with our community. So it's dated today, January 22nd, 2019. Members of the Irvington school community, the Irvington Union Free School District is in the process of conducting a review concerning what appear to be certain discrepancies associated with the records for a specific employee. Our expectation is that this review will be completed no later than the date of the next official meeting of the Board of Education, which is scheduled for Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. We anticipate further communication to our community to the extent that it is legally permissible to do so. We ask for your patience as we exercise due diligence in the interest of fairness, transparency, and appropriate resolution. And the statement is signed by myself, Mr. Michael Hanna, President of the Board of Education, and Dr. Christopher Harrison, Superintendent of Schools. So thank you for taking the time to listen to the statement. And we will proceed in our agenda. In fact, we do now have an opportunity for comments from members of the community. If anyone would like to, I guess, be handed a mic, we would offer you the opportunity to ask questions or make statements generally on topics that appear on the agenda, but we're usually pretty generous about it. But if you could identify yourself by sharing your name and keep your comments or questions to approximately 3 minutes. Would anybody like to share? Allison, could you share the mic? Thank you.
Hi, Della Lenz. So will you guys be discussing what's on the agenda in public?
What's on the agenda? So we have our roundtable discussion,
On what you referenced
and then we have a
earlier?
consent agenda and the business of the board. So to the degree that once we're done with the roundtable discussion, if members of the board have questions related to consent agenda, we could discuss those if they're interested, but that's the extent of what we'd be discussing.
Yeah, I'm just interested to know whether you're going to be discussing the issues on the agenda about Jesse Levinsky publicly.
And which item is that?
In the consent agenda, the resolutions, it takes up most of the consent agenda.
Right. Certainly there's the opportunity for board members to ask questions about that.
Okay, so it'll be discussed publicly.
It's part of our consent agenda and it's
Okay.
available for the community.
All right,
Read,
thank
and
you.
we're able to discuss it if it's desired.
So I'll wait until the end.
Okay,
thanks.
yeah, there's additional opportunities for community comment and question at that time. Very good. Okay, does anybody else have a question or comment? Very good. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Harrison to, I believe, launch our discussion.
We're trying to see where Dr. Kor is.
I got it. Chris is doing it. Are you doing it or I'm doing it?
Can I put this in where you were in?
So, this is nice. It's a nice big square tonight. This is, I don't even know how many years we've been doing this now, and each year it's a little bit of an evolution, I think is, from my perspective, any good process is. So as we are launching into budget season, we actually started our conversations as an administrative team back in the fall, certainly by November, working with Carol, and just starting to examine where we are, what our needs are, and how we might accomplish the many goals that we have as a district. So the roundtable conversation started several years ago, and it was an opportunity to sit in a more informal organizational setting and actually have us all sitting at the table. And so tonight we have all of our administrators sitting here, and we are going to try and bring to light a couple of topics in particular that we believe are very complex and are very prevalent right now in terms of schools, in terms of state education department, and I think right in the front of everybody's minds. But the purpose of the roundtable is a discussion. So some people say, well, what does that discussion really look like? How is it? Is it questions and answers? Are we going to go around in a circle and each building is going to, or a department is going to present their thinking? So we're going to try and do a little bit of both. One of the things that we did to prepare was we spent a lot of time ourselves talking about what we want to share tonight, and we want to do it through a building/department lens in a way that increases the understanding of the Board of Education as well as our parents and our community. So we are trying to start each of our presentations by framing.
You're too far away.
I'm too far away. By framing, all of the work that we do in district really now falls under this umbrella of our strategic objectives. And I think we're all really proud of this work collectively because it's given us a way to talk about our goals through very specific expectations. And so as you look at our strategic objectives, you will see that that first one provides students with a rigorous, comprehensive, enriched, and diversified curriculum, et cetera. I don't need to read the entire piece. Encourage innovation, creativity, et cetera. But number 3, foster the social and emotional growth of all students and promote culture and where students are active participants in society. And I'm highlighting that one in particular because I think you're going to hear a lot about that tonight. But each piece of our work links back in some way to at least one of our strategic objectives, if not several strategic objectives at the same time. Should I try again, Chris? No. No such luck. Sitting under our strategic objectives are our theory of action and the goals. And our theory of action is the work that we use as administrators in the district. If we provide students with a rigorous, authentic learning experience rooted in a comprehensive curriculum, then they will acquire the knowledge, skills, and dispositions of successful 21st century learners that will prepare them to thrive in a rapidly evolving global society. And when we developed that theory of action, I think we made assumptions a little bit about the social-emotional layer in there, so it's not as explicit. So we love that our strategic objectives sit as the umbrella on top of that.
You want to pass it over to me?
I do. If I throw it, you think you could catch it?
I'd like to think I would, but let's not.
Okay.
Don't need a workers' comp situation.
Thank you. In order to meet our theory of action, we put forth our goals. And so our specific goals, I hope, seem familiar to you. They should be appearing throughout the year and in previous years through other presentations. So these are the goals that we work toward every single day, and I specifically, in this case, highlight the last bullet, which expands on this idea of 21st century skills and dispositions: problem solver, flexible thinker, collaborative learner, effective communicator, empathic citizen, self-reliant, reflective, creative risk taker. So it's each of these that we work toward on a daily basis to help our students grow in ways that we hope will make them effective, really citizens of the world and global citizens. It wasn't proximity. So in looking at this, that's annoying. In framing the night, many of you have heard us talk about essential questions. And so we thought it was important that we frame our work around an essential question. A good essential question has reach. And when I say that, what I mean is it doesn't only relate to one thing or one topic. It actually has and feels relevant in a lot of different ways. So is a balanced approach the right approach? Under that, I put a couple of sub-questions just to clarify what does balance mean and who defines right. A good essential question is debatable. And in any given year, the budget is debatable. We go back and forth and we try and provide good, sound information that informs the board. We try and fill those blanks in throughout the year as we do other presentations. But in the end, balance is really personal. We look at it as an essential question in the word balance because, again, it has a lot of places that it fits. We could talk about balance in math. We could talk about balance in life. Balance of work, balance of play. We talk about balance because it is something we all strive to do. And every year we set out to build a budget that feels that it's right, feels presentable, feels respectful, feels fiscally responsible. And so is the balanced approach the right approach? So as we go through tonight and you hear from our building administrators and our departments, is the answer, is it about equity? Is the goal to give every building and every department something? And those are the questions I've listened over the years to all of you as you face and you grapple with the different ideas that are being put in front of you. What does balance mean? Does that mean that it's balanced, that it's on a continuum, that you have a clear vision of where we're going with it? It has a beginning and a middle and an end. And ultimately, who defines right? Who at the table, who in our community? There is no one right. So over the years, we're always going to have the push and the pull. The people who want one thing and the other group of people who want something else. And so this idea of this essential question is the question that we're going to be looking at tonight, but it's really the question that drives the work during budget season. So, about a month or so ago, maybe 2 months now, we presented on the long-term planning areas of focus, and we highlighted for you several areas that we felt had long-term, that we had long-term goals for, especially around the idea of staffing. Through that process, what we've been able to do is say we have long-term goals and we have short-term goals. Tonight's roundtable discussion is about the short-term goals, the short-term asks. So there will be things, if you go back to that previous presentation, that you will find in there. But tonight's goal is the foundation for going into budget. So what we want to share with you tonight and open up the floor to talk about are the things that we are going to be putting forth in our requests for this year's budget. Not next year, not 3 years from now. So if you don't hear us talk about something that was sort of front and center in your mind from the last presentation, chances are it's because we're not suggesting or recommending it or asking for 1920. We'd probably have that more in the future. So, but we can touch those as we go through if necessary. So for tonight's agenda, we tried to break this out in a way that we hoped would be useful and supportive. And, you know, this morning, Curriculum Committee had a chance to talk us through and help push our thinking around how we could approach this that would make the most sense for our Board of Education as well as our community members here or watching at home. So the roundtable discussion, this, is going to focus on 2 topics, SEL, social emotional learning, and shared and part-time staffing. And the reason that we selected those 2 topics is because we felt that there are a lot of underlying issues, questions, concerns within and beyond this room. So we tried to take the most complex work and open it up here so that you have a chance to ask us questions, so that we can share our thinking, so that we can hear your thinking, which ultimately informs our thinking. You'll see at the bottom where I just listed the schools and departments. So brief individual topics that may be touched upon tonight may happen, but will also be discussed through budget process. So I'll give you an example. I am sure during budget process for Dow's, Main Street, and middle school, we will ultimately touch on Amplify and the science and where we are with that and how our program assessment of that is going and what we're suggesting for next year. We're not going to talk about that tonight. We will talk about that in the context of the curriculum budget. And really, it's not because we don't want to talk about it. We would love to talk about it. But we do want to make sure that we can move on and get home before we have to, get up for tomorrow morning. So we felt like SEL, shared and part-time staffing, would take up a good chunk of our conversation tonight, and then we would want to, if possible, give the administrators a chance to touch on some of those other topics that absolutely will surface, though, at a subsequent meeting.
I think to maybe add a layer and then maybe a structure for us that kind of, as we move forward, it seems appropriate that we step back and that we are focusing on social emotional learning. When we think of our work together as administration, as a board, with the community in the budget process, we spent a number of years looking to build our academic programs. There's a lot of restoration that we attended to ensure that we are providing our students with optimal learning experiences, looking at programs that had either been reduced or cut in recent years as a result of the financial crisis. So we see ourselves on a pretty solid footing instructionally, but when we step back and look, what have become obvious needs for us is what's happening in our schools. How do we support our students to ensure that their well-being is attended to? And I think through the conversation today, we're going to see lots of practical examples of that work in our schools. And then similarly, we've talked about shared and part-time staff. In doing so, we can say that there's some real benefits to a small school district to think about how there may be some cost savings associated with that. But when we look at those cost savings, we have to also look at the impacts of program, the impacts of children. So it's going to be a little bit of a pivot, as Raina referenced. But when we think about where we are and we think about the structure of this workshop, I'm going to look to Michael Hanna, and he and I are going to try to keep some tabs and keep us on track. We want to be able to spend about 30 minutes on the discussion related to social emotional learning. As we look to close that up, I'll have a little timer going on my computer or my phone, and we'll try to give it a little bit of a 10-minute warning. And during that period of time, though, leading up to that, we want to hear the voices of different administrators to share what you're seeing in the schools, to understand the initiatives and programs and curriculum that are present in your schools. So we're going to speak in snippets, but we want to hear as many voices as possible. But we want to be able to slow down towards the last few minutes for the board to share some takeaways, the board to ask a question or two if need be. And then we'll pivot and follow a similar routine for our shared staffing and try to keep us on target to really have a focused, productive dialogue.
So as just a reference point, this idea of social emotional learning, and I certainly don't need to read that for you, but we wanted to have at least a common understanding of what we're talking about. Earlier, I think I referenced the push around state ed. Many of you know that there have been some new mental health regulations. There were new expectations around health curriculum, and certainly new expectations around counseling. And we were very happy last year to be able to bring in a K-5 guidance counselor who is now part of the process of making those plans and putting a K-12 counseling plan in place. So with that, the last thing I would say before I sort of launch us to get going in our conversation is as an administrative team, we really looked across. And so some of the things you're going to hear are very much in common. Some of the things you'll hear are in common of elementary. So Dow's and Main Street will talk about things that are definitely relevant at the elementary school, while the secondary administrators will talk about things that are relevant at the on this campus. So with that, I guess I would open the floor to, I don't know, Michael, did you want to say anything before we start?
I will start to try and do the more organic part of this because I certainly don't have any prepared statements or thoughts. But no, I'm excited. I think as you referenced, Raina, we've had the roundtable over the years, and it's been morphing. And today we're trying to do something a little bit different, like you said, to unpack a topic like this. And my observation at the end of our last presentation, which was on the long-range planning, which was really excellent and something we've been looking forward to for a long time. You talked about in the presentation what the different things that as a team of administrators as you got together that what would be other ways to continue to improve instruction and well-being in the district. And the takeaway for me is that we've done a lot in both the supporting curriculum and instruction and the social emotional learning and certainly the other areas that we work on, such as maintaining the buildings and grounds. But it seemed like we've done a great job in terms of getting to a place where, at least what came across in terms of what we were hearing from the work that you've done as administrators, that there's been a lot of progress in supporting curriculum and instruction, but that supporting social-emotional learning, that there's still, even with all the work that you've been doing over the last number of years, that there's a lot ahead. And I really look forward, I think the board looks forward to hearing your stories, your experience, your insights. And I would love to have someone jump forward and say, this is my story.
So 2 entry points. One entry point are sharing some of the things we're doing, and I think the other entry point is to share some of the observations that we've all been making about things. And I would open that up because I think your entry point could be either way at this point. So if there's anybody who would like to share something you're doing or an observation of where we are.
All right.
We could always count on you.
Just
Sure.
Just a reminder to grab a mic when you speak to make sure your voice is recorded.
So first, I would like to start by thanking the board, because in last budget, you supported a K-5 guidance counselor, which was a tremendous ask and get for us on K-5. And we've been fortunate enough to have one start this year. But we've learned as we've gone along, I mean, we're only partially way through the year, is that in order for us to support the program and sort of the vision and ideas that we have for supporting the needs of our students, one K-5 guidance counselor may not do what we need that person to do in terms of a resource to the best level that we could have possible. And I would say that I share that because for me, and I know for Deb and Andrea, we want our school counselor to be someone who has the ability to connect with all of the children in our schools K-5. You know, we look at it as part of what's called our response to intervention approach to supporting our students. And the counselor would really, and she does now, have a role in that tier 1 support. And that's someone who provides the support for all of our students. Right now, it's through push-in lessons in the classroom. So she's doing a variety of lessons at each of the grade levels at Main Street School, and Deb and Andrea can speak to what's happening at Dow's Lane, but at Main Street, the focus has really been around problem solving and making good choices. And then we have the opportunity for teachers to be in the classroom during those lessons so that they can then pick up where the school counselor leaves off and continue that work through morning meeting lessons and follow-up. So those are all still part of our tier 1, where all students are getting the support to develop, you know, certain social emotional skills that we expect them to have. And then that carries over to the work that happens at recess, where our recess monitors, you know, have the same information because we share that during training support. So we are trying to build a system that supports our students, every single student at that tier 1 level. But with one school counselor right now, you imagine she's being shared, I think is it a 6 week, it's 5 or 6 weeks in between when she gets into a classroom for that lesson for support. And so that's a long, you know, that's an extended period of time.
So
But
would
it-
that be 8 times a year?
So it's about 8 times a year we figure it out. She'd be doing 8 lessons in every classroom a year, around there, 7 or 8, depending on how that works out for when we started doing it this year. Ultimately, in the future, it would be more. We also have a vision of this school counselor being able to provide tier 2 level supports, which would look more like groups for students. So being able to identify an area where kids need more targeted support. So based on those classroom lessons or observations from the teachers and using tools that we're exploring, we would be able to identify and use data to support that there are students who need an increased level of support. And that increased level of support could look like a tier 2 intervention, which would be a small group, maybe around, I want to give you some examples. So growth mindset might be an example, like students who are just not there yet. Maybe they don't have school confidence, and that's impeding their success academically. So I will say, because I don't think I've said it yet, is, you know, all of this work is because we want our kids to be, you know, socially adjusted and emotionally adjusted, but there is an academic connection to this. So because of some gaps in our students' development socially and emotionally, they are not able to access the learning in the ways that we want to see, and they're not necessarily making the progress that we think that they're capable of. And we think that we could do more. We are doing and I think you said this, Michael, there are lots of things we're doing in all of our schools, and I could list them, and I'm sure they'll come up in the conversation at Main Street, which are really good, and we've been doing them for a long time and building on. But what we're focused on now is we've done such a good job building our response to intervention system for academics, and that includes Tier 1. That's quality instruction for all kids. Now we really need to do the same intent and give the same attention to our social emotional RTI approach.
You got a mic?
It's applicable to Dow's Lane. I think for Andrea and I, a layer as well, and it's indicative of K-5, but certainly at K-3, where we want to build a program that's both proactive, where we're supporting children through these Tier 1 types of programs, where we give them a common language. This push into every classroom is so that we can build a foundation and a language to speak from, where every child has the same experience, and then we can build on that. But we also have children who we have reactive needs. And even at the kindergarten level, where children are learning about themselves for the first time, and for many children, second grade may be the first time they struggle, third grade. But we also have kindergartners and first graders who are feeling what that struggle is like for the first time. And it's how we coach and help them through that. So I think to Joyce's point, we have a wonderful attempt to begin Tier 1. It lies parallel to character education and character building. Our school counselor program is not our character education program. I want to be sure that those two things sit separately. But what a school counselor can do with an area of expertise is provide that very explicit instruction around strategies, where our Tier 1 teaches into language and vocabulary and the knowledge that we want children to have. What a counselor can do is really support the implementation of coping strategies, behaviors that promote learning. We just did a data run on our students at Dow's Lane, any child who's receiving a 2 or below on behaviors that promote learning, and that's in our report card. And out of our 515 students, we have over 200 students that have 2 or below in those areas. And we address those through daily classroom instruction, through morning meeting, through responsive classroom. But clearly, we have a responsibility, K-5, to support those behaviors that promote learning, teach into them with strategies, so that we hope to build a foundation that they will bring on to middle school and high school.
And I thought you talked about some of the strategies. The word struggle has been used a number of times, and when I look around the table to some of my colleagues, I know there's some of those struggles or challenges that we see that may be unique from school to school. But then there's some common threads that are woven, from school to school. We see it in department by department. And I was wondering if, there maybe as an entry point to talking about some of the things at the secondary level, could talk about some of the needs that you see that are present among our students.
I always think about it as like, what's the good news, what's the bad news? And, unfortunately, there's some challenging news. And, the level of anxiety across the board that we've seen in our teenagers has been on the rise. We see that exhibited through some of their decision-making and their impulsivity. So, we all pick up newspapers and read about everything from jewels and vaping and various aspects. That's one form of how, negative behaviors and an offset of anxiety can be dealt with. But it's also a readiness factor. It's a readiness factor for students to be able to be prepared to come into the classroom as best as possible. So, to me, that's one layer of how we've seen their behaviors come across. When I think of the good news, I think of the different types of programs that we've had at the high school. I think of everything from peer leadership. I think of our partnership with IASC and CAB. Through any and all of these programs, the amount of conversations that continue to be had around supporting our students each and every day around the stress levels that they are dealing with is only on the rise. Some of it is for the good work. Joyce said it well. The good work that we do around assisting our students with being high performers and doing incredibly well in their classroom. We've done a great job in the high school, I think, over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of enhancing our counseling program and helping students prepare for the college process. But I also know there's a tremendous amount of pressure that our students go through each and every day. So while we have a lot of initiatives and a lot of ways that students get exposure to understanding how to better regulate themselves and how to cope, we've had the meditation lab in the high school and in the middle school. We have our health class where we have outside partnerships that come in. What we also recognize is there's a great need for something more systemic and an ability to put together something that we know each and every one of our students will go through to be more proactive in our approach. So one of the things that we think would really enhance the campus, and I think more specifically about the high school, would be having a dedicated social worker on the campus. I have a vision of having a wellness center whereby you can have everything from workshops that students can experience to a place that students can pop into on a regular basis. It's not about dealing with kids in crisis. It's about dealing with kids to help them with their coping skills and their daily social and emotional well-being, so that ideally we're keeping them from getting into crisis, and we have a better support system in place around it.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Jump in.
Discussion.
It is, right? I'm just making sure. So can you talk a little bit more about that, or not just you, but everybody at all the different levels in regards to sort of, I think what you're alluding to is sort of this idea of like academic and social behaviors to be proactive around things like, self-regulation, communication, collaboration, et cetera. So can you guys talk a little bit about how you address that proactively in the tier 1 of RTI, which you referenced, Joyce, as the stuff that happens in the classroom on a daily basis, right? I would love to hear like the different.
At elementary?
At all the levels, middle school.
So, just to reiterate some of what I said, our school counselor does a push-in lesson, so every student has access to that lesson, and then she provides information to the teachers at a team meeting, what's the lesson that she's going to be doing, and then we talk about what are ways that the teachers can support that moving forward in between her visits that she comes to the classroom. Again, it's between 5 and 6 weeks that she's returning back to the classroom. And then we also provide support through sharing that information with our teacher aides and also with our school monitors, so that we're all, to what Deb talked about, we're building a common language around our support for what students are focused on and working on. That's an example of a tier 1 support.
I guess one of the things I just want to layer in, it's about 5 years ago since we added to the elementary report card, where we actually changed our terminology to behaviors that promote learning. And that was really the foundation, at least 5 years now, and that was really the foundation of that thinking that says, we need to be explicit about what is it that we're looking for students to know, look like, and be able to do. And it's 2 years, or just last year, that we actually shifted, and when you look at the behaviors that promote learning now on the report card, they're really habits of mind. And that was an evolution, and to the point where the teachers asked for that section of the report card to be habits of mind, because so much time had started to be spent on that whole conversation and the actions and behaviors of the habits. And so that's a layer in there that just sort of sits in the background of some of these other actions.
Well, and we look at what supports we have for academic, or how we foster the learning in the classroom academically. We've put, as you heard many people say earlier, we've put a lot of attention on that and developing consistency across the content areas in elementary school, in ELA, in math, moving towards science. There's so much attention being put towards that. We'd like to look at our successful models academically and support the work that we're doing with our social emotional work as well.
I'm gonna go ahead.
I just wanted to add one important point in that, and it speaks to what Dave said and Joyce. We don't want to wait for a child to start struggling to the point where it impacts their learning. We have children who are very successful, but they hide that struggle. And it's because of how much pressure they put on themselves or how hard they're working. And we could say as educators, we wish we could take that work ethic and sprinkle it. But it's those children who are often experiencing, or in my opinion at Dow's Lane, are at the greatest risk. They have indicators for stress and anxiety that, because the complexity of our curriculum isn't at its peak, and it will peak, we want to be able to look at indicators or criteria that might help us identify who are those children that are struggling, and how do we develop a program to address their needs?
So Dave's question, though, I just want to reiterate, so Dave's question is, though, what are we doing? So I just want to be clear, right? So when you say that,
So an
so just give an
example,
example.
We
Dave.
know one of the greatest ways we can impact children is the connection they make with adults in the building. So I would say morning meeting is one of the greatest ways that we can implement what we're building from initiative to a program, and really supporting teachers to implement that building-wide, is that ability every day to have a forum to connect with their students on the level of social emotional learning. And they are learning strategies and skills and habits of mind through that morning meeting format that helps them to identify what they're feeling, helps them to be able to communicate it in a collaborative setting, but also for the teacher to listen in and keenly listen in to what the experience of students are as a class community. So I would say, and for Andrea and I, morning meeting is one of the most important components. And it's through that morning meeting that we could have data to support school counseling at a tier 2. But certainly a morning meeting program for all is an extremely important piece of the puzzle.
I think I would echo for one of the things that Deb said with respect to the importance of a connection with an adult. And one of the things at the middle school certainly that we're proud of and want to continue to build upon is the work that's done by our counselors at each grade level. We do have a program for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students where our counselors are in our classrooms and are working directly on targeted areas with students, whether that's through supporting the transition process from 5 to 6 and helping students to conceptualize life as a student in this big campus where you have got to go all these places and solve all these problems with all these different people. 7th grade through our health classes, 8th grade even beginning to look at something beyond Irvington where we're talking about career possibilities and so forth. They spend time with kids in each of those class spaces as well as in smaller groups and one-on-one settings and so forth. Those are really, really important avenues for us to connect with students and for each student to feel like there's somebody in our building that they know that isn't expecting a homework assignment from them or something like that, but that they can connect with. So when the going might get a little bit rough, they have a place to turn, and that's one area. That's not the only area, but it's certainly one that is certainly meaningful for us at the middle school.
And the conversation that we're having, I think we could back into a lot of common themes. So we're talking about the good work of our guidance counselors and some of the programmatic pieces that do occur with push-in lessons, the work that's associated with the RTI process. And back into that, we know there's themes, right? When we think about needs, we know that anxiety is present across the board. So when we think of anxiety, it's easy to think of, boy, our kids going off to college are worried about where we're going. But when we think about kids with problem-solving skills, impulsivity, where there's conflict or bullying, depending on what the situation may look like, peer relationships, and as kids get older, generally speaking, and I don't want to exclude our students at Dallas Lane, but school phobia begins to surface. And in doing so, there's a lot of other players that factor into that work in the school. So we've talked about our counselors, guidance counselors, but we also have a school social worker that was referenced, and it was Dave Cohen a few minutes ago that talked about that need for a K-12 social worker. And I can tell you, when we went through our planning process, whether it was long-range planning or our first round of budget planning, that was something that came up in every conversation, building to building, department to department. So I think there may be some value, and maybe I turn to my partners in PPS to think about, what is that role of a school social worker, and how does she serve the variety of needs? Because those needs look different than the needs that may be present for guidance counselors. So maybe Gail and Shelley, you want to take a minute to shed a little light into
So
the
Chris,
role of
just
social
as a
work?
moment, so everyone, you have the handout, and in the back of the handout, toward the back, are those overview of each of the positions. We had sent this to the board, but this is just as a reference point as people are speaking. Sorry, Gail.
And just before Gail answers, just to be clear, we have a social worker that's K-12. And so that is what you're asking Gail to explain. But Dave's comments earlier was in addition to a social worker at the high school.
Yeah, that is accurate, Maria. So we do have one K-12 social worker and a position that was only restored a few years ago. So when we look before that, it was a void in our infrastructure. But what has come up universally and I'm glad you asked the question so I can clarify my remarks, is that there is a request and a need to look at a second social worker. So Gail and Shelley, if you want a little window in?
So thank you for the board also from recognition of the need of a social worker in the, I believe, 15-16 school year is when we were able to find our current social worker. And if you look on this document that was created, it talks about the definition of what a social worker is. But more globally, when we look at the role of someone we have now, we can categorize it into four main categories in which she supports our administrators and our families, and that's through teacher consultation, direct family, direct work with students, crisis, and really accessing resources outside of the four walls of our school buildings and building that homeschool connection. And those are very large pieces, and how it plays out into individual scenarios can be very different. But what we know is that she also is playing a big role in our overall social emotional learning for students. She's on the basketball courts at times, working with students to really try and access what is really going on in those moments, and then helping to build that support through the tiered system. So, and I think when you see that work, it's very broad, and the needs becoming greater through time, and the balance of maybe an elementary and a secondary model, because as we've talked about, although the needs are the same, they manifest themselves differently from an elementary to a secondary model.
I think when we think about it, there's a real change in tide. We talk about some shifts in our community. 7 years ago, we looked at our free and reduced lunch rate being around 3%, and now we have a number that we know exceeds 9%. So that's one window in, but we also recognize that we have a more diverse community, a more international community than we had years ago. So there's lots of connections that folks need to be able to make. But there's, aside from that change, we have lots of folks that struggle in making connections and finding supports to help them and their children. And our social worker's been a tremendous resource in helping build that bridge to services that extend well beyond the school district. So whether that's social emotional help and support for their family or their child, whether that is simply putting clothing on people's backs. That's our 10-minute warning, by the way. Clothing on people's backs or food on their table. She is a key advocate for them and is in people's homes. She's making phone calls. They have her personal cell number, and she's there around the clock to support these folks. And the number of touch points that she has with families is really overwhelming. And she has been worth her weight in gold, and we could use certainly more than one.
I just had a question. It's always good to do a little bit of risk-taking here. I'm going to acknowledge that I have not looked at an elementary report card in a little while. So that's very interesting to learn about that measurement, because it's certainly, I don't remember that as a part of the report card I looked at for my children. I would just be curious to hear a little bit about how that's determined, and then for the other administrators, there's this description of a pervasive anxiety, but how do we understand that? How do you determine that? I think there are indicators, and I'd love to hear what they are for you.
So as Raina shared, when we went through a report card revision and really looking at the behaviors that promote learning, everything from their study skills and their ability to take ownership of their work, demonstrate self-reliance, their management of their impulsivity, homework, and study habits. That launched some really awesome conversations. I can speak for Dow's Lane. I'm sure it extends to Main Street School. But what we began to then discuss at each grade level was, what does each of these look and sound like to a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, third grader? And then the conversation brought into, well, what does that look like in December? What does that look like in March? And what does that look like at the end of the school year? Because each report card offers an opportunity to assess students. So I'd say that we began to engage in a process of really, I would say, quantifying it in some way. What are those criteria? Developing rubrics. So I know an example would be the first grade team sat together at grade level meetings, and they took the behaviors that promote learning. What does that look like as a first grader to demonstrate ownership of their work? What does that look and sound like? What might be the indicators of a student that does well at a level 3 and what we would expect? And what does it look like to a child that might be struggling? And those are very difficult to quantify because you're taking a whole child and you're trying to measure certainly what it looks like in math, may be different to how it looks in literacy, depending upon their own strengths and where they feel their own struggles and lack of confidence. So I would say this is a work in progress. I'd say we want to take a look at these, and I certainly when we ran the data and we ran the data because we were exploring what could be criteria that could support the identification of students who need additional service. Attendance, behaviors in class, certainly input from teachers, but there has to be some type of data that we can look at, and as Joyce shared, we're exploring different tools. But then how do you actually put that into writing? So much like we might do a writing rubric, and we might look at, we talked about habits of mind and looking at rubrics that possibly could span a year and the ways in which we can measure that for students. So I would say that it's a really important topic because it is something that we want one classroom to look differently from another classroom. We want to have a common language and a common way to assess students for those behaviors that promote learning and what that looks like across a grade level and across K-3.
Okay.
Please, also at the elementary level. You mentioned something early on in your comments about responsive classroom. It wouldn't have meant anything to me except that I've been trying to learn a little bit about this area. What is it? It's a software tool of some kind?
So responsive classroom is an approach. It's an elementary school, things like morning meeting, and the way in which we have accountable talk and things like that. Responsive classroom could be referred to as a program. It's ways in which we engage students in discussions that are related to social emotional learning and having them reflect upon their learning in different ways. At the foundation of responsive classroom is the connection that a teacher makes with her students and how a teacher has specific strategies and ways in which we can develop a class community. And it's through that foundation of class community that you build what is considered a responsive classroom. The ways in which we respond to students, you can follow different routines and different structures, but at the ground level, what it speaks to is the connection we have with our students and how deeply we get to know them, not just on an academic level, but on a social emotional level. So when I speak about morning meeting, responsive classroom has a morning meeting model, and we took from that as a reference to be able to build what we would consider an appropriate morning meeting at Dow's Lane, and how much time that takes and with what consistency and frequency our teachers engage with students in morning meeting. So I would say some of our teachers we all have the book, and we all engaged in learning together. Much like we do with any topic, we do shared readings. We read from books. We engage through our character building committee, and then we did some rollout where we had teachers visiting each other's classrooms during morning meeting to see it in action, and then supporting teachers in the implementation.
So a piece that I would add that maybe would give some context to this is I think we're at a place where, I don't know, quite a few years ago we were with math or other academic areas where there was a lot of good instruction going on in classrooms, but we didn't have any consistency. We didn't have any way to measure it. We weren't able to say, this is what happens in all first grade classrooms in math or in ELA. And so really what you're hearing tonight and some of these conversations are steeped in this idea that what we don't have is we don't have a written curriculum. We don't have a consistent level of training that has been given to all teachers. So some of the things that you're hearing talked about actually at all of the levels is that's where we see the work. I think Chris referred to it as, we've done a lot of work with the academics. Joyce said it as well. Now is what we're ready to launch in terms of how do we build this and how do we have something consistent and comprehensive.
So, Joyce, earlier you made a statement about that there's an academic connection with the social emotional learning, with the kids, and I totally agree with that. And I am a very big believer in early intervention, whatever that looks like. The younger you get to them, the more effect you can have on a child. So, in theory, the idea of the guidance counselor, I support. I need to hear a little bit more of what is going on the day-to-day. If I'm hearing right, she does lesson plans, and she's also working with the teachers. Am I hearing this correctly? Working with the teachers and giving them strategies on listening and also helping kids develop skills, whether it's how they interact with other kids, bullying, whatever. I would like to understand a little bit more of the role that person plays, because you're asking for another person. So clearly you see a need, and I need to understand that better.
So, do you want to go, Andrea, or you want to, and then I'll pick up if you, okay.
So our K-5 counselor is in both buildings, and she runs small groups in the classrooms. She works with the teachers, and she is always focused on a theme of the month or a theme of the unit that she's working on in each building. As Joyce said, she's been working on mindfulness and some character ed, some peer conflict at Main Street, and at Dow's Lane. She started with mindfulness, and she continued with social interactions with the children. As you've all heard, if we could start a strong foundation at the K-5 level, we have students that can access curriculum, they could focus on learning, and the social emotional piece is sort of in check. When we have students, Michael was asking, what does it look like? Students that are dysregulated in Dow's Lane cannot access the curriculum. They might be showing signs of anxiety. They might cry. They might be nervous. They might shut down. So they're not ready to learn their math facts or even be approachable for reading. So our school counselor has set up sessions with the classes, with the teachers, and in collaboration with us to help support that social emotional foundation.
But she's one person, and there are 39 classes of, 20 to 22 students. And so when I think about what I would envision for a school counselor model at the elementary level, someone who's accessible to all kids. Having one person in two buildings does not make her accessible. I can't say, wait a second, don't have that problem on Monday because the school counselor's not going to be here till Wednesday. So in order to really develop what Raina talked about as like a cohesive system, we need the staffing that supports it. And when I look at us academically, we've increased that academic staffing to really have a solid approach in response to intervention academically. Now we're looking to do a similar build for the social emotional component.
Yeah.
And then to follow up, you spoke about, tier 1 intervention, and you spoke about tier 2, that you want to go to the next step using data. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that look like?
About the data we would use to go?
Right, what would you use to help inform, and what would be tier 2 intervention?
So obviously we're still in the planning processes of what this would look like, given that we currently have one guidance counselor. But Deb mentioned it earlier. I actually made a list as we were talking. So there is a lot of data we could look at. We can look at our attendance data, our behaviors that promote learning data. We're looking at a potential screener that would be administered to all students for social emotional learning. Teacher input is another data. How students perform academically, so looking over time at Ames Web data. So we have many pieces of data that we could be looking at to inform which students we would be identifying to getting that additional support at a tier 2 level. Remember, tier 2 interventions are not an infinite amount of time. They're a targeted intervention with a finite amount of time with a targeted goal that we progress monitor over that amount of time to see if progress is made by that student. We're doing it really well academically at this point. Still working on it, right? We're a few years into response intervention academically, but I think our systems are really well developed. K-5, we're consistent. We have information as kids move school to school, and now we're saying we can put our spotlight and attention on the social and emotional well-being, and we hope that doing that actually supports what we're doing in our academic model of our response to intervention, because we'll see an improvement academically in the students who really can't even access what's happening for them in their learning because of social emotional concerns.
And I would just piggyback on what Andrea and Joyce are saying. It's funny, Andrea, when you talk about your students in the elementary schools who are dysregulated and have a hard time accessing the curriculum, so too do we see the same concerns at the high school level. They're just taller. So students have a difficult time getting into the building regularly. Students who can be in attendance, but inattentive in the classroom, or in the classroom and not intellectually or emotionally available. I think, Joyce, when you say that it's a challenge to spread the work of one counselor in 2 buildings, I think we feel the same strain when we talk about the need for social worker, where we have one social worker supporting the entire district. And I think we're finding more and more at the high school is families in need for access to support systems that are in place outside of our walls, insight into how to access and how to make good use of those tools. I think what we are finding more and more are families who are struggling to know exactly what they should be putting in place for their kids before they even get into our buildings. And, we talk about things that we can measure. I am deeply concerned about our students who are showing up on our radar as having school avoidance as juniors and seniors, as they start thinking about the next steps in their academic career, and now are saying, I can't bring myself into the school on a regular basis. I can't get there, or if I do get there, I can't get myself into a classroom. So
Matt, to your point, if thinking the difference between a guidance counselor and a social worker, what might a social worker do that would be different than a guidance counselor in dealing with a student that has school avoidance or school phobia challenges?
So my view of that is that the social worker has an in-depth knowledge of services and availability of county support tools that can be accessed by the family and that can be worked with the school as well. The other piece of it is I hear Deb and Andrea talk about the work that the counselor is doing with their teachers to help teachers understand more deeply what students are experiencing. I think our teachers will benefit from that as well. I'd love to see a social worker come in and help our teachers understand in advance those concerns that might be slipping under our radar. And to paraphrase what you were saying before, Deb, which I thought was so apt, we have a lot of students who they show a lot of academic prowess, athletic prowess, artistic gifts, but those things just serve as camouflage for concerns that are sort of laying under the radar, and all of a sudden we have a student who, until yesterday, seemed to be doing extraordinarily well, who all of a sudden can't get themselves into the building. And when those things happen, what do? We react. But it'd be great if we had a partner in the building who could help teachers to see those things before they surfaced, help families to access services before the thing became critical and frightening, and head it off before it became an issue.
So Chris, so my question is this. If we don't have a written curriculum and the plan is not fully developed, and this is an area obviously that's new and it's not going away, what comes first? Are you saying that we need to hire a social worker in order to gather the data so that we know what we need, or do we develop the plan first and have a better understanding of what our needs are, having already gathered the data, and then you come to the board and say, we need a social worker, we need a psychologist for these reasons because the data shows that? It seems like what comes first? Is it that we need the social worker or these extra hires in order to collect the data to better define what our needs are, or do we define our needs and then you come back to the board and say this is exactly who we need?
Yeah, so I think our conversation tonight's a little more theoretical and trying to understand and learn around what the individuals do and make those practical connections with what's happening in school. I believe from looking at where we are, I think we're on 2 different journeys, right? And where we are with an elementary guidance counselor and where we are with a K-12 social worker. And there's a lot of work that's going to be going on throughout the course of this school year where we're going to see the development of a K-12 guidance curriculum. So there's going to be lots of articulation and alignment of efforts. So I think there's going to be growth in that front. I don't want to ignore the commentary of my colleagues based upon the needs that they're observing in the elementary school. But I think we step back and we look at the role of the K-12 social worker. I think we're going to be able to identify a lot of data on the touch points and the pure volume of communication and the number of students that she is interacting with on a daily, monthly basis, and how we've been able to see that trend over time. So when we move forward with an actual proposal that will come forth within the budget process, I anticipate that it would be supported by data that we've been collecting related to the social work program. Admittedly, the guidance counselor piece is something that is continuing to evolve. As Joyce started off her remarks this evening, we're very fortunate to have the addition of the counselor this year and thank the board and the community for that support. But it's a program that we are growing with. At the end of the day, we know there's only going to be so much money available, and when we consider the priorities that are before us, I can't make a guarantee that when we get here on March 5th that there'll be a request for an additional elementary guidance counselor. But we've been putting a lot of time and effort to looking at developing a request that would support the need for another social worker. So Deb, I think more to come, but that was a great question.
But to,
I'm going to hand off to you, Beth, but I just, because we've spent a good amount of time, I'd just like to have a question or two more from trustees if they haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something Ms. Hargrave said. So I'm trying to understand something. We're talking about the guidance counselors and we're talking about the social workers. The first point of clarification I have is the request that might be coming for an additional K through 12, or I'm also hearing it being asked for somebody who's only for grades 9 through 12 that's housed at the high school?
For the social worker.
For the social
Yeah,
worker.
I think Dave just threw that in there.
Okay. That was the thing.
Just to clarify, I said campus.
So I'll step back and clarify. So we're looking at a scenario, Beth, where we have one person K through 12. And if we were fortunate enough to be able to add a second social worker, we would look at re-envisioning the roles and responsibilities. So it very well may end up with someone that's campus-based, so secondary schools, and someone that is elementary-based. If we have that increased focus at one level or the other, I think it presents the opportunity for a vision such as one that Dave communicated to grow legs, right? You think of the idea of being able to have different regular touch points for kids. And
Yes.
in the conversation earlier, right, there was reference to the meditation lab and other things. Well, these concepts become aligned and integrated with the
Right.
more focused effort of staff members.
Okay, granted, I understand that, and it was very helpful to hear from Mr. Samuelson that there's value added, and we've discussed this with Dr. Kaur, because they have access to county-provided resources that are at no cost to the district. So thank you for pointing that out publicly. I did also want to ask, though, I haven't heard anything about the SED requirement on improved mental health education. In our health classes, we have 3 years of health classes in grades 6 through 8, and an additional class that I believe is in either grade 9 or 10 in the high school. What's being done to bring in the social emotional learning into that requirement of mental health education in our health classes?
That requirement came out July 1 of 2018. New York State doesn't expect us to roll something out within 4 or 5, and I'm not saying it just for you, Beth, I know you know, I'm really saying it for everyone else. There's never an expectation that when New York State adopts new regulations or a new curriculum, that you do that within 6 months. Having said that, there are things we've been doing all along that support that.
So that's present in the curriculum in the middle school?
So there are some aspects that I would say are in alignment with mental health education that are present in the curriculum, and more that needs to be done. We're actually still awaiting new standards, though. If you go to the State Ed's website, presently, yeah, they're still looking at standards that are now outdated. So we're waiting for some additional guidance on that, yet knowing that we have work to do and are looking to do that work.
And I also would just add, I think whether standards or no standards, I think we've generated enough information and enough topics and enough areas of concern or areas that need focus, that if it takes New York State 17 years to give us those standards, and it could, there's work that we're going to be doing in our health curriculum while we're waiting for those standards that just relate to the guidelines of the mental health, as well as just what we know are the concerns and needs that we've identified ourselves without New York State. So I don't want to make it sound like we're going to wait.
That don't require an additional hire.
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
I don't want Deb's question to get lost.
Thanks.
Yeah, because that's an important question.
Say it again?
I think no, I mean, I think if I got the gist of it, the gist is which way, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? And so like what I hear, I'm curious, I'd love to hear more over the rest of the conversation, but like, responsive classroom, a little of this, a little of that, it's in the curriculum sometimes. I would love to hear see at some point in time in the future, not necessarily on the moment, and feel pressure to answer this, but like some kind of cohesive piece, right? Like where like when a kid comes out of Dow's Lane X into Maine Y to you, right? Like, I've experienced some of the pipeline just to see the cohesion across the programs, right? Like, 'cause they're all really good programs. And, I know our district has a propensity to customize and to, tailor to what's best for our kids, right? And what's best for our delivery. And so like to see what kind of plan comes out of that would be really interesting.
So can we just clarify, because I think we somehow got out of the gate, and somehow the counselor and the social worker got mixed. The request for the social workers, we are at a huge deficit. Functioning as a K-12 school district with one social worker, mental health regulations or not, we are not, based on, Chris shared some of the statistics, how some of our demographics have changed, some of the needs have changed, what we're seeing in our schools has changed. We are at a deficit for our social worker.
But how do we know, Raina, not to interrupt,
So-
how do you know? What is the data, like, I mean, what are we looking at to show that we are at a huge deficit?
So, you want me to share our data collection?
You can speak to it, I don't think it's get number by
So
number.
what we tried to do was look at 4 categories in which our social worker works. Student support issues, family collaboration and outreach, staff collaboration, and crisis situations. Give me a second. So our numbers, we've been tracking them since 15-16 in each of those categories. Now, what I cannot speak to with 100% certainty is a time that each of these areas take. But when we look at sheer numbers, so in events that we've been looking at, when we look at the high school in particular, in 15-16, when student support issues started off with 15 events, so 15 families, 15 students. We are at, this year, we went from 14 to 20 in those years. When we look,
And if I just can qualify that you're looking at a full year versus part,
right, so year to date.
2/3 of a year.
Correct, so year to date on that category alone is 15. And this was done late November, early December, this document. When we look at family support and outreach, we went from 7 the first year to 33 for 17-18, and we are at 15 year to date, again, November. So those are the 4 categories that we have looked at, and we have this data for each of our buildings.
And I think our building administrators could also just support that when they talk about the work that our social worker right now is doing and the number of hours. So I don't know if anybody wants to,
I can jump in. Allison, do you want to go? You haven't shared yet.
I would say in the past 2 years, specifically this year, we have partnered with the social worker nonstop. We have several students and families that really need that outside support. Our counselors and school psychologists are amazing, but as Matthew said, the outside agencies that she can connect families to really address the problems of getting the children here has been essential and crucial to starting to really target the needs of these children. And these cases are complicated and they're not short-term resolved.
Can I just add?
and affect multiple buildings,
And,
very
Yes.
often,
Yes, families.
families.
And one, sorry, go ahead.
you go ahead.
The addition to that, when we talk about these outside resources, it's not that any of us can not necessarily gain these access. We can. Her wealth is beyond what we are. But it's not just the hours of the school day. So these services that she can access, it's for that complete wraparound that is far outside of our area of expertise as educators, as parents for some of us, and, it doesn't just stop at 2:20. So it's that component, and that is where we are often sometimes 24/7 because we're dealing with a crisis that, although it might have started at 10 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock at night, it's still going on, and we are working with those agencies. So that homeschool connection is far greater than we can necessarily count in hours.
And I would just add, just in the same line, that for many of our students who are in that sort of crisis, the only structure they have is the structure they have at 8 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And when they leave, families need support in putting similarly healthy structures in place for their children. The social worker is invaluable in that regard. So it is truly a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week position, and certainly have made good use of the social worker that we have in that sense.
And it's amazing when I hear it from the other buildings, because we do also. So I don't know how one person is possibly doing the level of work and to the depth that she does it. It's comprehensive. So when she gets involved with a family at Dow's Lane, I mean, the one benefit is that she's with that family. So my transition from Dow's Lane for families who've been supported has been tremendous because I have the support and the background knowledge and the relationships that have already been formed with the social worker and that family that we're able to build upon that. But new families and new situations with students come up. I don't want to sound alarmist, but it's frequent that we have a need for someone who can access resources beyond what our school counselor can do and what our school psychologist can do. And so I know sometimes people say, like, oh, we have all this support staff, but it was really helpful to see written out the definitions. They do serve very different roles. We overlap in that we are all supporting our students together as a team, but they each take on certain distinct roles in what they're doing to support students, and then the social work with the family. So I do want to share the social worker we have now currently. We wrote, as part of our response to intervention plan, an attendance response system. So we are seeing students not wanting to come to school in Main Street school. That is like, who doesn't want to come to Main Street school? But in all seriousness, like, we put together a comprehensive plan, but it takes tending to. We have to meet every week. Well, I'm taking that time for every week, because I do believe if we do early intervention, whoever said it earlier, Maria, I believe that if we're giving this, she provides that outside connection to families who are struggling to get their students, why don't kids get to school on time in Main Street? It's not really the kids, it's really we're talking about what's happening at home before the students come to school. So she provides that like outside resource to support them getting to school. So that we have already seen a decrease, our data proves it, a decrease because of our interventions through our attendance response system with some of our students who have been chronically tardy or absent from school since kindergarten. We are starting to see an improvement, and that takes tending to. But she can't possibly do that in all buildings and do all of the other responsibilities and meet with me weekly to do that responsibility. But that's an example of what a social worker does to support what happens at school, kids getting to school, but also the families getting the kids' structures that Matt talked about at home. So.
Well, I think I want to take this opportunity to say that this conversation kind of organically surfaced out of our long-range planning discussion last month. And clearly, there's a lot of thought and energy and concern here. And I don't think the conversation ends tonight, but I do think we'll pivot now, if that's okay, to talk about our second subject.
Yeah. So, well, thank you, and thank you for everybody for your contributions. And do want to draw everyone's attention back to the document that we referenced for more information. But another area that surfaced was related to part-time and shared staffing. And Randy, you want to give a little overview of the dialogue?
I just want to clarify. So on the screen, I'm not sure that everybody even knows what we're talking about. When we say part-time or shared, what does that actually mean? So just so that we're all on the same page, when we refer to part-time staff, it's members of the staff who do not have full-time teaching assignments. So in other words, they're not 1.0. That's how we refer to them, as a full-time employee. If they're shared, what we're saying is that they are possibly a full-time staff member. They're not necessarily. So I can be shared and part-time, I can be part-time, or I can be shared. So just wanted to clarify that. So shared staff are members of staff assigned to one or more buildings. So just wanted to put that out there. The document that you have in front of you obviously doesn't have any names of teachers on it or faculty members, but it gives you some insight into how we are organized. So for instance, I'll just do the top row just to make sure we're on the same page. So you can see the 4 different schools there. For the first position, it's technology. It's PLTW for grades 3 through 5. That position plays out that it is 0.3 at Dow's Lane and 0.7. So keep in mind there's another full-time staff member at Dow's Lane who provides PLTW K through 2. So she's not shared. She's at Dow's Lane full-time, and that's how we meet the needs of PLTW K through 2. So I think I've probably said enough on that. One of the highlights I just want to point out as we start to get into the conversation is really, while you might say, oh, well, this is sort of interesting or not, it's really the implications. So as our administrators speak, they're going to speak to you about the implications of examples of where they have shared staff and how that affects the staff member, but more than that, how it affects their, the functioning of the school. So I don't know if we want to start maybe with each administrator could give an example of one of these and how it plays out, which might spark some questions from our board members.
I figured it might be funny if I start with the social worker position. So, I mean, there are a number of shared staff members that we have at the high school, and I think it plays out really in a whole host of ways. I think music is one of those places that you can certainly point to. And some of it, I think, is a function of specialty, but I think some of it's just a function of how we've done business in the district. So, you know, we have 3 music teachers that each support the program at the high school, and each of them plays a role in at least 1, if not 2 other buildings throughout the district. So some of the impact that has is the way that we can operate the extent of the program. So at the high school, we only offer our music classes during period 9, but that's certainly not where the program begins and ends. So we have pull-out lessons for students to be able to get specialized instruction either by instrument or certain segments of the work that they're doing, or sometimes by a specialty ensemble. So for instance, our jazz ensemble operates through pull-out lessons. So if a staff member is sharing their time in other buildings, then that means that automatically there are limitations throughout the day as to when they might be able to pull out from other classes. So then that means that we're not truly rotating through how that person can, how that teacher can have access to students. So it means that when we're doing those pullouts, students have a tendency to miss the same classes over and over again rather than being able to spread it out throughout the day. So, you know, that's one example. And then some of the examples that I know all of my colleagues experience is anytime we have staff meetings or professional development meetings, we sit and we put a lot of time into figuring out which meeting each of our shared staff members is going to. And inevitably, sometimes it means they're going to miss some key information at one of our buildings, some key initiative, or some key level of professional development work that we do.
I'd say the music piece impacts us also, because we're shared with the high school and the middle school for music. So just to add on to what you said, Dave, I would say that for us, it's also a piece of that staff member being a part of our school community. You know, and being able to, we talk about social emotional learning, we talk about character building, how we want our kids to make connections with staff members. Well, sorry, you can only make a connection when they're here from this time to this time, but they're not available any other time because they're at the campus. The other experience for us is when we share staff with the campus, we have to run on the campus schedule. So when I look to build my schedule at Main Street School, I have to put in the music part first before I can look at like my response to intervention support periods, before I can look at when students receive services, before I can look at when specials come. Because I have to make sure that everything fits with when a shared staff member needs to be. It also puts, puts limitations on what I'm able to offer students at different times of the day. Which again, same thing happens for instrument lessons for students at Main Street School. So it's not, not being part of the school community, meaning missing staff meetings or not being there for character building assemblies, like those pieces add up in terms of the kids' experiences for what they have in our school. And character building is a big part of what we do at Main Street School. And you know, all staff attend when it's a whole school experience. And I'm fortunate that it's 4th and 5th grade, so we can do a lot of things as a whole school. And kids notice who's not in the room when we do events like this. And when we try to make connections back into the classroom or make connections through art and through music, which I think is so important, we are limited in what those connections can be because our music staff is not present at what happens with an experience. So I can fill them in, but it's not the same thing to be there present for an experience and then translate that back into what you do for students back in your classrooms. And it connects to so much of what happens for our students during the school day. And I know that listed on this document, there are a lot of other examples. That's a music example for Main Street.
So Joyce and Dave talked about art and music, and both of those impact the middle school, certainly. I feel like they've done a really nice job of covering so many pieces of that, so I won't further go into that. But I'll just talk a little bit about those times where we have our core academic teachers who cross over between buildings. And I think sometimes there can be a perception that, well, if somebody's on the campus, it's kind of like just being in the same building. And it's really not, for a lot of reasons. One, on any given day, we might be running on a different schedule, our two buildings, and you can imagine what that does to a person's period-by-period schedule over the course of a day. But we're also talking about things that are part of the fabric of either of our schools. One of them at the middle school, for instance, being extra help. So when we have someone who is primarily a high school teacher who teaches at the middle school, we're trying not only to find a time in the middle school schedule where that person can teach the class that we need them to teach in a period where we need an extra section or whatever the case may be, but we're also in what I would call some high-level negotiations with the high school. Well, could they also be free during 0 period maybe or 6th period so that they might be available to give extra help to the students in their class? Because that is pretty much a part of life for students in all of the other classes. So if you're, for instance, a social studies teacher and you teach a section at the middle school as primarily a high school teacher, well, the students that are in the other social studies classes for that grade level, they have an opportunity to go to extra help with the primary middle school teacher. We need to create a level playing field for those students to have access to their teacher, even though that particular individual might or might not spend most of their time in the middle school. That's a real conflict, and it pulls away at something that we've really worked very hard to establish as part of the fabric of the student experience at the middle school. That idea that I can take ownership over my learning, I can seek out my teacher, I can develop those relationships, which also tie back, by the way, to a social and emotional connection to school. It's an impediment to that, I guess is what I would say. That's one small example. I could give you plenty of others, but I'm also trying to be mindful of airtime. So.
And there's another example in the elementary school. I'm going to talk about the OTs, the occupational therapists. So shared staff limits our flexibility. Also, we have 2 occupational therapists, and they're both shared. So if their schedule warrants it and the student is absent on the day they're at Dow's Lane, we don't have the flexibility to make up the session because they might not be in the building the next day, or it might be a snow day, or something else might occur that impedes their services. So shared staff just limits our flexibility if we have to be fluid and flexible to meet all the children's needs.
I would just piggyback with this in the same area for speech. We have 3, some days we have all 3 speech teachers in our building at the same time. And we've done a really nice job at defining each of their roles, mandated services versus building level services. And then we have 1 speech teacher who also has an area of expertise as a hearing teacher. So I think that it's one of those situations where we really tried to implement what's called a flex period this year at Dow's Lane, where students are pulled for services at common times per grade level. But there are areas in which we have to work outside those flex periods, and then it's quite a puzzle. Where you might be negotiating with another building, we're negotiating within our building at when students are receiving these pull-out services and what core instructional program that's impacting. And for us at Dow's Lane, I think shared staff, we have the least amount of shared staff. Technology has been wonderful, I think, with the vision of PLTW and moving our technology teacher to just 3rd grade. We were able to impact just 1 grade level schedule, and it worked out beautifully in our master schedule. Not easy for any staff member to be across buildings, because again, you're not really completely connected to both school cultures. And when we spoke about social emotional learning and the connection of children, they connect with who they see in the building. It's what Joyce speaks of at character building assemblies. It's the same thing on a daily basis. I think for us at Dow's Lane, we see the greatest impact with sharing something like an instructional coach, where we have 27 teachers vying for time with our literacy coach. And just today, in looking at her schedule, she's turning teachers away because there's just not enough time, 0.6 at Dow's Lane. And the fact that you have to turn someone away means she's wanted. And the work that we need to do in the area of literacy is just tremendous and rewarding at the same time. So for us, it limits the access. And if a teacher is teaching the next day and you want to see a lesson build from one day to the next, and you want to follow a workshop model and you want to see the implementation and you have shared staff, it may often be 4 days before that coach can get back into a classroom and see that work and be able to work with the teacher to look at data and to build their capacity in a program.
Question?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so clearly, you've done a great job sharing stories of the effect of, you know, to your schedule. I guess, do you think you'll be able to, over time, do an analysis of, or maybe you already have a sense of, like, what are the real pressure points? I mean, you talked about one that's driving your schedule. I mean, is that, are there other, I mean, does it feel like you could always point to one or two that would really dramatically change the experience at a school if you could change the role of that faculty member?
I think just
Yeah,
like,
music
Yeah.
music at Main Street School would have a dramatic effect for us.
Yeah.
And art.
And art.
I think
I'm
art
so
has
music and
been
art.
effective.
So our art teachers share it also with the campus, and both of them have a major impact on what happens at Main Street School.
and I think when we think of at the secondary level, the social studies and having a part-time position, the need to continually have to refill that position certainly speaks to that need to look to make that a full-time position as well.
In terms, the one experience that we've observed, both as a board and administration, is that the faculty like to come and stay here in Irvington, but the one area of retention is with the part-time staff.
And I know that it doesn't, you know, it's not the kind of thing that gets talked about a lot, but I'm going to say that every time we need to replace one of these part-time teachers, we are taking the administrators and teachers out of the classroom for committees, for hiring committees. For each hire, I would say that it probably is an investment of at least one administrator, 6 to 12 hours, 15 hours. More than that?
I would
Are
say
you
that's
kidding?
just in the actual interview process.
The interview process,
Right.
yeah, I wasn't even,
Let's
get
not talk about-
resume and all that,
Right.
you're right, you're right.
Right, reference checking.
Reference checks. So every time we hire someone and then we lose them, it starts that whole cycle all over again.
And I think it's important to point out that that cycle is unaffected by the fact that it's a part-time versus a full-time staff. In some ways, it's as much or more time on task for a part-time because it is that much harder to find the pool that you need and so forth, because those positions just don't draw the same level of number of resumes. So you might not look at as many resumes, but the challenge of finding a person who's a good fit for our school and our students is you know, increased dramatically.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I listened carefully to a lot of the things that there's talk about, you know, get it, right? Everybody gets it, fundamentally speaking. I wonder, though, when you mentioned data a whole bunch of times, and thank you for that, I wonder, how do you, I think that's how to phrase this. One of the key markers of strong social emotional functioning is engagement, right? And there's a real clear crosswalk when it comes to engagement in terms of teacher practice, right? So I wonder, like, what kind of analysis, because I heard you say, Deb, and I heard you say, Joyce, who doesn't want to go to Main Street, right? And all of a sudden we're saying, David, you even mentioned, like, you know, people not wanting, you know, there's people not wanting to go to school. So it begs me to ask, you know, how much of that is depression or any other piece that you might think that would cause that, or how much is actually engagement? And you know, in the classrooms, and you know, kids walking into a classroom being like, "Get ready for that Regents again," or "You're going to make me drill those math facts? I hate it." You know, and I wonder if, you know, when I look at this, and please, you know, if we looked at something like, you know, a full-time science cluster teacher at the elementary school level, where, you know, I hear kids all the time, science, I want to do more science, I want to do more of this, and I'm engaged, and I want to go to school because I'm building this and doing that. And it just begs to surface the question, or the statement, or comment, or whatever you want to call it. I just wonder.
It just, it's so contrary to what we're trying to do around interdisciplinary, the new standards, science standards that demand writing. So I get that whole idea of a cluster teacher, but.
That's just an example.
No,
I'm
I
not
know,
suggesting you
but-
ask her that, I'm just saying,
Good.
you know,
Okay.
the idea that, one day I will, but the idea that, you know, how much of the engagement piece is teaching and learning? and how much of the engagement piece is real issues? And I'm sure there's both, right?
So, I mean, I don't have a data set to share with you to that end, David, but I'll just talk, I guess anecdotally, about the experiences that I have in talking with parents, and with individual students and with the counselors that work with those students, and my own observations from being in those classrooms. Now more than ever, when we're talking about students that have a dramatic level of anxiety, we're talking about students who aren't available for learning. And I'm thinking of a couple of really particular cases that we've been working on at the middle school over the course of this year. Students who are in, real need of support for issues that that need to be resolved, or at least in some way ameliorated, in order for that student to become engaged. It's not a question of a learning activity that is just not interesting or so forth to them. It's more some areas of need that again, go beyond the walls of our school. Yet these are students that are certainly capable and certainly can succeed, but need something to get them to the point where they're available to do that work and to do that learning. So I won't belabor the point, but I'll say that's an area for us where we've seen a real growth in the use of our social worker, both in the outside of school and then in the inside of school, working through those challenging times with that individual, or those individuals, I should say. So that's not data. So I respect your question, but I just need to share the experience that we've had, particularly lately.
Chris, my observation on this particular category for tonight is that I would be interested in knowing what the turnover is for some of these shared and part-time positions, and because if it's taking away our administrators' time, constantly interviewing, and there's a position here, whether it's an occupational therapist or another core class teacher, how often are these positions turning over? How much time is it really taking up our administrators? I'd also like to point out that we're all well aware, having sent our children through these schools, the challenges that the music and art teachers pose in having shared positions. If you have children that take those classes, and we know that it cannot be easy watching that individual run back and forth between the buildings, as well as watching an administrator trying to schedule those classes. In particular, we know that our orchestra teacher is retiring. He made that announcement. So this position in particular, where it's a shared orchestra position, I'll be curious to see what the hiring process looks like, and if you can find a teacher that's going to, frankly, be willing to do what the orchestra teacher did up until this point, because I can't imagine it's the best model out there, and there's not something else you're going to want to propose. So I am focusing on orchestra and music, and I am concerned about it, because even though we did it in the past, who knows if we can do it going forward with another hire. But I do agree with Dave. I think for all of the conversation tonight, whether it's the part-time and shared staff, or in general, needing counselors and therapists, this board is looking for data. I mean, we believe what the administrators say, we understand and the challenges that you face, but to hire somebody else, we really need to see in black and white, in the form of data, that before we're going to, I think, approve additional hires. And whether that data is that we have increased incidents and we need a social worker because she's handling more events, or the type of events are different, or that her hours have increased, but I think we're looking for more, and I know this is not the forum in which we're going to do that, but I think we're all in agreement on the board that that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, no, Deb, I think those are great points. So when we step back and then answer, you made a number of points there, and to speak to a bunch of them, I think we're in different places in our journey with the social worker versus the guidance counselor, and we'll be able to present different information to be able to support at whatever request comes forward. And I think when we think about the part-time position, I think this year alone, we have quite a story to tell and talk the evidence about the turnover in that particular position. But I think we can also look back historically to look at other part-time positions that we've had in the district where there was noted turnover. I can think of French, for example. And it wasn't until we actually made it a full-time position, because of the turnover, did we see stability in that role. So we can speak to that as well. So I think we can look at current information. I referenced social studies before, and I think we can look back at other part-time positions and turnover that we were actually able to stop based upon making it a full-time position. The shared staff piece is going to be a little more difficult to articulate. We can speak of significant impacts in the building. The one thing that would be interesting is the recruitment of a position, and looking at just a straight music teacher, a straight orchestra teacher that's going to be teaching in one school versus someone that's going to be teaching among 3 different schools is going to require a different type of candidate in some ways, or a person may not be as interested as a person that can hang their hat in one particular school and build connections with kids, faculty, and school community. So I think there's lots of layers for us to explore there, but I think all your points are great and well received.
Just to add to, following up on what Deb said, I too had the same thoughts about the part-time staff and the turnover, because exactly what you referenced, Chris, about using the example as the French teacher. I remember when we approved that as a board. My concern or my question is, you know, it's disturbing to hear how, for example, this shared orchestra position, how it impacts the different schools. But then when you think, you know, as a board member, you know, we don't have a bottomless pit of money. So looking at this, for example, at Main Street, it's a .4 position. And at the upper campus, I know it's 2 different schools, and it's a .6 position shared between the 2 schools. I mean, I'm not exactly hearing what the ask is going to be here, but I can't envision adding a whole nother staff member for a .4 position.
I don't think, this wasn't about the ask. I think the reason that we provided this was because with the board, there was lots of conversations about wanting to understand the scope.
And the impact.
And the impact. So we're not like saying, oh, so by the way, can you make all of these whole positions? No, we'll be back to you with some of our thinking around this, but we just wanted you to see, and music, of course, has such impact across.
Right.
But these other positions, some of them do as well. So they were just models of where we are.
Understood. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
I did have an additional question. So in addition to the music and the art issue that, you know, we've clearly have brought out, I'm hearing now that social studies, Spanish, math, and tech and computer science are shared between middle school and high school. And I know that there are proposed changes in scheduling for high school, and I'd like to know more, maybe not now, but later, about how that change would affect the difficulty of providing extra help in the middle school, as was described by Mr. Sotile. So I don't know that I have a full answer on that for you tonight, except to say that Mr. Cohen and I have spent some time looking at some of the models that they've been working through, and you know, are aware and conscious of the need for staff that are shared to be available at both buildings. But there are, you know, there are additional constraints that come from a new schedule that could give rise to some further discussion about how best to share staff, or which staff to share, or so forth. I think there's some additional conversations that are ongoing in that regard. So as information becomes available, it would be good to understand that.
That's great.
Good. All right, do we want to try the last piece?
Yeah, so the last piece, I guess, a little more complicated, but Raina, before we jump there, did you want to connect on the considerations in the wood? I think it's been kind of embedded in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think it's, Raina, if you want to reiterate it, and then we'll pivot to the final component of our workshop.
Or we could
You
just.
want me to go here? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
You want me to go here? I think that these are just the questions that are going to resurface as we continue on in the process. I think the last piece that we just wanted to do was provide an opportunity if there were any individual items that the schools were coming forward with possibly requesting or at least defining the need. I thought we would just have a chance to touch those again. Those will be fleshed out through the budget process. So I'm not sure that anybody wanted to highlight something in particular, but we just wanted to put that out there. That was the case.
I think I would say, in follow-up to Raina's comments, you know, just as she kicked off the discussion this evening and talked about the continuity of our work, right? Thinking about grounding the work in our strategic objectives, linking it to our goals and theories of action. The one thing that's become very clear in our work over the past 7 years has been about that work of developing a true K-12 system, where you see alignment in work, and you've seen a lot of that connection tonight. So when we step back, and if I'm going to say to you as a superintendent, well, there's certain things that are going to come forward that are real evident in our mind right now. That K-12 social worker is a profound need, and to some of the comments and questions that were referenced before, it is certainly something that can, of course, be supported by anecdotal evidence, but also through some data-driven recommendations. There's other areas that sit outside of what would be coming from the schools, and that's looking at things on a district level, of course. So school safety and security remain a priority. We know we're looking to prepare for a capital bond referendum that's going to address a number of different areas, but we recognize there's things that we have to manage within the school district budget. So areas related to safety and security are important on that front, and there'll be recommendations that will be made for that as well. Looking at infrastructure of our schools and being able to prepare necessary renovations and repairs, but then also looking to update things like our phone system and that are the critical needs that can't wait 2 years for bond work. But stepping outside of what we're seeing globally on the district lens and things that you're going to learn about on the 12th and the 5th, I know my colleagues have some burning desires as well.
Should we give
You're going to see some continuity there as well.
Yeah. It's been so quiet on the side. Let's give them a shot.
I got the seat up front here. I guess if we're looking at what you might be hearing coming forward, one of the biggest asks I think for athletics will be the institution of a full-time athletic trainer, and I think we talked about this a little bit last time. You know, we have had, I think over the last 4 years, services that have been contracted out, and we've had a trainer as part of the services come in. But I think moving forward, anybody who's in here who's had somebody who's a student athlete who's been involved in athletics and has seen the work of the athletic trainer, we can get more. And I think we can broaden her scope of work, or whoever's the person is scope of work, to really enhance what the student athlete gets through the programs here, not only in a reactive in terms of treating our athletes and tending to their needs and working with the coaches to rehabilitate, but also to be proactive and work with programs to really give our student athletes a sense of what they can be doing to be preventative and look at ways in which they can train, work with the coaches on training methods, and also be involved with our nursing staff, so we can be looking at how our athletes are cleared, how our athletes are involved in the process of concussion management, which they're already a part of, but I think the more involvement and the more they can be a part of that, the further it will enhance our programs and our student athletes' experiences.
You know, David, you brought up an interesting point before. You talked about engagement. You talked about engagement from a standpoint of comparing it to multiple conversations that we've had tonight, including social and emotional learning. And, you know, I know one of the things that we've been looking deeply at the high school is space, and our ability to utilize our space, and some difficulties that we've had around that through multiple lenses. So one lens is through our student lens. So we've been, you know, trying to create more flexible learning spaces throughout our classrooms over the last few years, and they're going to be asks that we will continue to want to put forward. Things like students being able to go to a classroom where there are comfortable chairs and different types of seating arrangements, and some standing desks, and they all meet the needs of different types of learners. So, you know, we have some learners that have a hard time sitting still in a classroom, and the ability to stand at a desk or sit in a bouncy chair, while it may sound simple in nature, actually greatly enhances their learning environment. Another area of need that we've identified in the high school is professional learning space. We are extremely tight. Typically in high schools, you will see that there's more sharing of classrooms amongst the staff members, and probably it's consistent in most districts that way. And certainly in our high school, it is that way as well. But we also have some limited real quality learning spaces for our teachers to be able to collaborate and work together So those are conversations that Matt and I put forward and had some conversations around and wanted to see some enhancements around. And again, I think it goes hand in hand, David, with what you had talked about. In some ways, when you improve the environment, you improve the learning capabilities as well.
Have you guys looked into Nest, the Nest programs that do that kind of stuff?
Mhm.
That take your space and make all those things, and look into something like that?
Makerspace?
No, Nest.
Nest?
Nest, but like there's, for another.
Sorry, I didn't fully hear you.
There are programs that outfit classrooms for
Yes.
learners in need,
Yep.
Nest programs.
An area of focus over a number of years for us at the middle school has been in the use of devices for students on a broader and more ubiquitous level. We've been fortunate enough to grow the number of Chromebooks that we have in classrooms over a couple of years through, partly through some of the generosity of our partner organizations, PTSA and the IEF, and also through some district purchases. We are, at this point, in a position where it makes a lot of sense for us to be thinking about a one-to-one initiative for students at the middle school, where each student would have a device. There are, a number of reasons that we could go into with respect to the instructional value, with the amount of use that our current devices are getting, the difficulty that we have getting enough devices into the hands of students in individual classes. In addition to that, the value that would be realized by scaling back on what has been a BYOD model among middle school students for several years now. So the idea that we would be able to take young adolescents and take them away from, say, a cell phone or some other personal device and put them onto a district-owned device for the purpose of doing their schoolwork is something that we see value in. So something we'll be talking more about as we go forward in the process.
And I would say, I think we see that as a need that's growing across the district. So when we look at where we were 7 years ago, we had spotty Wi-Fi on the campus. And now to a position where we have some pretty solid saturation on the campus, where multiple users can be on for extended periods of time without connectivity issues, although not perfect, much better than it ever was. In the past 2 years, we've also been fortunate to introduce Wi-Fi at the elementary schools. And in doing so, that was achieved through the use of Smart Schools bond money, so that monies that came from New York State. One of the challenges, of course, in all this is that New York State process and the bureaucracy that we have to dance through to get there. So the first phase of our grant was the Wi-Fi connectivity and related infrastructure at the elementary schools. The second phase of that grant is specifically related to the purchase of additional devices. The state of New York has yet to be able to approve the second phase of our grant. And once approved, we will then be able to, one, purchase the devices, and two, submit for reimbursement for the devices. So that initiative, which is roughly $96,000, will put a nice dent into the needs that are present in all of our schools. So we're looking forward to that, let alone what we see as a priority coming from the members of this room, and the recommendations that are coming forth to be able to increase the use, whether that be one-to-one at the middle school, and then just increase usage for all of our schools and all of our students as well. And I think so that's a need from just going back to our budget process, and I'm looking to all my colleagues, that came up in every single conversation that we had, whether it was long-range planning or budget meetings. It was evident.
I think connected to that for us at the elementary school is that we've increased devices, but we have a need for hiring someone who would support the teachers with technology integration, so that we're designing our instruction, that we're not just substituting our devices for paper and pencil, but that we're actually considering, you've heard us talk about the SAMR model before, but that we're considering the ways that we integrate that technology as we design our instruction. So that would be a teaching, someone who would come support what that integration would look like, so that we could look at what our technology plan, how do we support the technology plan, roll out into the classrooms and support the teachers doing it. So we've been grateful to get devices, but we need to take them to the next place with the students. And another ask for me, just along the lines of safety, is, our gym is in a separate location from our building, and our PE teacher spends the entire day by herself, for the most part, down in that gym alone. There are some times when we're able to support her if we have an additional staff member because the student's absent or because we have 100% attendance for teachers. But other than that, she is by herself. And in this time where we're so concerned about safety, we're asking for a PE aide, someone who will be in the gym with her for the duration of the school day.
So I would echo Joyce's speaking to, as we increase devices, and I think at Dow's Lane, we're primed to make some really great decisions around the implementation of devices in the classroom, but it leads to the question of how do we support teachers to shift their instructional model. You speak about engagement and the engagement that students show when they can work with devices and innovation, but that's not simply putting the devices in the classroom, it's supporting teachers to know how we can implement those devices in an innovative way and how it can shift along with the SAMR model. I would echo, Chris and everyone's asks in our capital bond to make a plug and a consideration to the community. I think so many of our asks at Dow's Lane are encompassed in that capital project, to infrastructure, to Dow's Lane, to safety. On behalf of the teachers at Dow's Lane, certainly supporting what I know the district is considering in terms of air conditioning. When we speak of engagement and the climate of our classrooms, I would be remiss in not really bringing that back to the surface, that we are in need of having climate control and having classrooms that have air conditioning for both our staff and our students. For us at Dow's Lane, our focus on instruction and the work of our instructional coach for literacy echoes the amazing work that Christine Rosner has done over the years. And Andrea and I have really been able to enjoy the fruits of her labor and seeing the implementation of a literacy coach at Dow's Lane and the impact that our literacy coach has had on instruction. We speak again to engagement and the ways in which we're pushing students to make meaning of text and connect with literature is one of the single most important ways that we can impact student learning. Literacy transcends every other core area of instruction, including science now with writing. So I know it's a big ask, and it's a shared, staffing for Main Street School and Dow's Lane, and there's no easy solution, and it's a big ask. But certainly for Andrea and I, coming out of budget process, having access for our whole staff to use our instructional coach, and for us to be able to implement some real comprehensive professional development models with lab sites and demo classrooms. Would really be an amazing asset to Dow's Lane as we move forward in a 3 to 5 year vision.
I did just ask for something. Okay. So tonight seems to have been a very fruitful conversation where we had the opportunity, as promised, to delve into two critical areas and two areas I think that of interest that grew out of our long-range planning presentation from not long ago. So having had that opportunity for dialogue related to SEL and shared staffing, I think we've kind of set a positive framework for some discussion that we're going to have throughout our budget process. And then, of course, to thank my colleagues for sharing some of their additional local initiatives that may additionally surface through the budget process. As Raina referenced earlier, those particular points will come up with some more discussion during our budget process, and satisfying a couple of the questions that surfaced as well, that there's going to be data related to them to identify the need to be able to support these important and necessary asks for the benefit of our kids. So to my colleagues, I thank you for contributing to this dialogue, and to the trustees, thank you for your good questions, because not only do the questions help keep the flow of this conversation going to help us delve into some deeper areas, ones that you want to know about, ones I think is important for our community to learn of, but also things that we walk away to help inform our thinking as we plan our next steps. So thank you to everybody for a great workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just add, I do want to thank everyone in terms of sharing the stories and the information that you have. I think this is a very hopeful and positive discussion, but you can hear in some of the questions and comments from the board that we've, thank you to Carol with the long-range planning and with the strategic plan that we put together, and, you know, there's an underlying tension that we know that unfortunately we can't do it all, right? So we can't, we don't want to shrink, but we can't grow particularly quickly either with a tax cap that's been very popular and likely soon to be made permanent. So we operate within some limitations that, you know, tell us we can only do so much in any given year. So I know you're working hard to really assess what are the pieces that we think we can do, and I look forward to that process together. So thank you for the preview and for the insights you've shared.
Good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll meet back here in a minute.
Great. Thank you, guys. Sorry, it's so late. It's okay? Okay? Said hope Sadie's okay?
Part of the agenda is our consent agenda. We'll have an opportunity to ask any questions, but could I get a motion to accept tonight's consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second, okay. Before we vote, I'll just mention we have approval of prior minutes. We will be accepting the resignation of our district clerk registrar, Margaret Robinson, and we have some other employee matters. We'll be approving a resolution, a corrective resolution related to the appointment of our Director of Technology. It's a detailed explanation of what occurred, and I won't attempt to summarize it since it's very well detailed within the resolution. So, an approval of a leave of absence extension. So, are there any other questions or comments before I call for a vote? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye. You have a
Very
motion?
good.
First and a second? You have a first and a second?
To the, earlier, yeah, it was, who called the first and second?
Is this the second?
Maria was first.
Very good. So, thank you for that. And now we have an opportunity for community comments and/or questions. And we do have a mic at the front here, and we would ask you to identify yourself and that your comments be approximately 3 minutes in length in terms of what you ask or share. So if anybody would like to make a comment or ask a question, you're welcome to. Normally we have it on the stand. I'm so sorry. Today with the round table, we had to make use of all our mics.
Della Lenz, some of what I have to ask will come after your conversation, but I had to mention a couple things. It's great with the roundtable, what you all do. But my question is could the board post, I'm not sure, I've looked for minutes for the curriculum committee, and I know that I sent an email to the board asking if more information could be provided on the technology that we currently have. So minutes would be helpful, and the location of the meetings and more details so that, you know, stakeholders can attend. And also, have you thought about, we used to have much more engagement with our board committees. So if you could consider having more engagement with the curriculum committee, and this was great, but some of what I'm listening to, I think the board might benefit from the aspects of what the parents think, what the students think. Social emotional, some of what the adults might feel is different than what the kids might feel. And it's great to sit in a room and for 2 hours and try to come up with solutions, but I think we need the input from the students and the parents to really have a good understanding. I know one thing at the high school is trust. And that's a big issue. You know, students don't really trust. We have a very punitive district. So it's really hard for students, especially struggling students, to seek that assistance when they don't have this, the trust, whether it's searching kids, accusing kids, going to a zero tolerance, which studies have shown does not work. You know, it doesn't work, and it hurts kids, and these kids need help. I think talking to the students and talking to the parents would be very valuable. Teachers are great, and we have a lot of support systems, and I'm not saying that they don't care about the kids, because a lot of them go above and beyond. But we need to get more perspective, and I think engaging, and that's part of our strategic plan, is engaging the stakeholders. And let's see. I think that was my only comment on that. Just if you can consider it, you know, it would be great if I could get all the information from newsletters and Facebook, but I think that we need to broaden our perspective. Anybody else?
Thank you, Ms. Lenz.
Hi, I'm Catherine Palmieri. I don't know if any of you know this, I know Deb knows this, but about 3 months ago, my daughter was injured on the soccer field and ruptured her ACL. It was a season-ending injury, which for her was pretty traumatic in itself, because she was having a great season, and for it to end so abruptly was a problem. In the process, though, I've learned a few things that I felt that I wanted to share with the board. And one was, I was shocked by how many of her friends had also had either torn meniscuses or torn ACLs and had to go through surgery. And I only found that out because there was no end to the number of surgeons that people were recommending to me for Adriana's surgery. The second thing I learned was how expensive it all was, because it's not only prehab and surgery and anesthesiologists, it's also rehab, and rehab is very expensive, not just to me, but also to the school, because what I've learned in the process is not only, so my insurance covers the primary insurance, but the secondary component of it is picked up by the school. What I've also learned since then is that the primary insurance then goes after the secondary insurance and subrogation. So my insurance company is going to pursue the school's insurance company. So you can see how this starts to become very expensive for the school, which is why I bring it up. The other thing I learned in the process in talking to the surgeon is he was saying that this is actually somewhat of an epidemic, that students are getting increasingly injured on the fields, and particularly female athletes, because the trainers are not aware of what they need to do differently with female athletes in terms of strengthening and exercise is proper preparation for athletics. So what the surgeon told me is that Hospital for Special Surgery, along with some other hospitals, actually give out free programs, free seminars. I printed one out from the Hospital of Special Surgery, which, by the way, has been picked up by the National State High School Association. I have an article on that I'll share with you. But what I was hoping to ask, and it was actually surprising to me that Artie asked for a trainer tonight. I think it's a really good idea, if only to save not only the health and athletic careers of our athletes, but also to save the district money, that it would be great to have a trainer. And if not a trainer, it would be, I'd respectfully request that as you go forward and you're approving stipends for coaching positions, that you make that one of the questions you ask, whether or not they have taken the training or will be taking the training, so that they can be better prepared. That's it.
Thank you. Next time we'll have the stand. I'm going to try the other mic. Very brave. Either way. No, go for it.
Can you hear me? Does it work?
I don't think so.
Use the other one, Aaron. Just don't drop it.
This for me is better because I like holding it. So
Yes.
I didn't have to struggle to get it
That's
out of
your
the
format.
Exactly. I'm Erin Bernstein, the parent of a third grader at Dazzling, because it wouldn't be my spiel if I didn't come just to remind everyone about the Flex program that we've discussed. And I know there are a lot of competing budget priorities.
One thing that I did hear recently, and Yas and I sent a letter, was that maybe that it wasn't a program that was wanted because the after-school program in Spanish hasn't been that successful. I just want to iterate in front of everyone that I think a big part of that is because it's after school, and most families have their after-school programs already scheduled. So, you know, that's attending one of those programs may be hard. I also hear from families that kids don't want another academic program after school on the K through 3 level. But what I am delighted to hear is that when we ran the Spanish club program at Dow's, I know there's 3 sessions. I don't know if that was anticipated, but there was a really strong turnout for the program during the school day, which I do think speaks volumes to the interest in the program. And I know also a lot of kids didn't want to do that either because they didn't want to give up their lunch, so parents aren't necessarily making their kids do that. Fortunately, my son did want to do it. Otherwise, he would have been made to do it, but he would have been fine. But I want to thank everyone for the program for the club because I'm excited for it. He's in the 3rd session, so I'll keep you posted on how it goes. And we are signed up for the 2nd level Spanish, so I hope he can do it. And that's it, but just keep that in mind that it could be scheduling, not necessarily a lack of interest. And I know like we plan our after-school plans in May. So for the next year, if we could get those programs out earlier, there actually might be more interest. So, thank you.
Thank you. No, I think, well, okay. We'll see. Did anybody else want to come use the mic? No? Okay. So thank you. So we had a very interesting round table, and we have approved our consent agenda. And do we want to go into executive session? I think based on, I think that is a good move. So just a notification, our next meeting will be on February 7th at 8 p.m., and we really emphasize the p.m. by writing it twice, right here in the campus presentation room. Could I get a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of talking about the employment of particular persons?
So moved.
Maybe I misunderstood. Did you guys approve the consent agenda yet?
We did.
Yeah.
We did, yeah.
Okay, so I do have one more. I thought that we were going in order public and, okay. I was waiting until that was done.
All right, we're mid-motion. I don't know what the,
Did you have a second on?
we had not got to a second. I guess we'll table that for the moment, and I'll give Ms. Lenz an
Withdraw
opportunity. Your motion.
Rescind that.
Thank you.
All right.
About what is on the consent agenda. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yep.
On the consent agenda, I was hoping that the board would have a little bit of discussion in public about what they're approving. Y'all are essentially approving $11,000 to go to Jesse that is outside of the contract, outside of past practice, and it's very concerning to me without any public discussion. Jesse isn't an independent consultant. He cannot enter into an agreement with administration, and especially our HR person, without going through the union and the board. The board can't, the administration can't enter into an agreement with Jesse. Jesse can't do it with the administration. This is, this is very concerning to me. So for the board not to have any public discussion and to vote to approve paying Jesse more than double what he should have been getting, because the contract rate, which the board approved, was summer help gets contract rate, which is for Jesse would be around $269 a day, and instead we paid him $600 a day. Besides the fact that through FOIL requests that weren't in the district newsletters and weren't in the Facebook page, 2 of them were for conferences, which are voluntary, and according to the contract, 1 was approved in 2016, okay? And so for 4 of those days, you paid him, those conferences didn't go to the board as far as I can find, and B, you paid him over double of what any other teacher would get going to a conference. And also, You stated on here that's what was required with summer work. He used to get paid summer pay, as far as I was aware, was summer work, according to the contract, at $269 a day for July and August. And generally, it was about anywhere between 22, 23 days. So you're paying him for almost that much for 1 month, knowing that he was going to start as an administrator the following month? What was it that he did in July that could not wait until August? And also, I'm very concerned about the wording of when administration and the whole thing about union rules. I saw the email sent to the teachers on the posting. The start date was, from administration, was August 1st. So July 1st, and again, this goes to the problem with approving things, and I mean, I won't use the word rubber stamp, I'll try, but approving things after the fact. The creation of the position was June 20th. June 21st, the post went out to the teachers with the start date of August 1st. August 22nd, the board met to approve, and Jesse was there to approve his start date being July. There was no discussion about him performing necessary duties that, had to, thank God Jesse was here in July because our district would have fallen apart, okay? There was applause from everyone, accolades, no discussion of what was happening. September 12th, another board meeting with a consent agenda, no public discussion, no disclosure of the extra pay, no disclosure of the extra work, of paying him outside of the contract, making a side agreement with Jesse, September 12th, to just change the hire date, and no board member questioned it? How do you not question that? Like, why? And it's just very concerning to me. There's so many issues around this that I have questions about. I'm sure that the union is going to take issue because I know that that was one of their points of contention. Negotiating the contract. They wanted a day rate. So I would be interested in what the union has to say when they find out that all the faculty are being told no, they have to get the contractual rate, and we have a side agreement made between our superintendent and our HR person. That's very concerning, and there is not one discussion. You're voting yes to give Jesse. He can keep the money. You don't have to approve it. So you are now taking ownership of approving this $11,000 without knowing what happened, why it happened, and I don't think it's responsible. And that you may want to ask a whole lot more questions before you cast your vote. Thank you.
So I mentioned before that I wouldn't attempt to summarize it, and I won't, but this resolution was developed with the help of our administration and council, and so I'll read it for you. Whereas the Board of Education has for several years approved by way of formal resolution duly adopted summer work for Jesse Lubinsky while he's serving as a teacher on special assignment to perform necessary technology work during the summer recess period, and whereas effectively July 1st, 2017, the Board of Education initially appointed Jesse Lubinsky to serve in a 12-month administrative position, Director of Technology, thereby alleviating the need for the Board of Education to continue to approve summer work for Jesse Lubinsky to perform necessary technology work during the summer months. And whereas, in order to serve in this administrative position, Jesse Lubinsky requested a leave of absence from his teacher on special assignment position effective July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2018, which request was approved by the Board of Education. And whereas due to union posting requirements as set forth in the Irvington Faculty Association Collective Bargaining Agreement, the initial appointment of Jesse Lubinsky to the Director of Technology position effective July 1st, 2017 needed to be amended to August 1st, 2017. And whereas on September 12th, 2017, the Board of Education amended its initial appointment of Jesse Lubinsky to the 12-month Director of Technology position to commence on August 1st, 2017, to be in compliance with the above-referenced posting requirement. And whereas the Board of Education did not simultaneously act to revise the time period for Jesse Lubinsky's leave of absence, and whereas immediately prior to his administrative appointment on August 1st, 2017, Jesse Lubinsky again performed authorized summer technology work and submitted timesheets for said work, which was approved in writing by his supervisor. However, due to an inadvertent oversight, the Board of Education did not formally approve by way of resolution the 2017 work for Jesse Lubinsky prior to his administrative appointment on August 1st, 2017. And now, therefore, it be resolved by way of this corrective resolution, the Board of Education herewith revises the initial request received by Jesse Lubinsky for a leave of absence commencing on July 1st, 2017, so that he could serve as Director of Technology, to a start date of August 1st, 2017 through July 31st, 2018. And be it further resolved that the Board of Education herewith ratifies and authorizes Jesse Lubinsky to perform necessary technology work during June and July 2017, immediately preceding his appointment as Director of Technology. And be it further resolved that the Board of Education herewith ratifies and approves the payments made to Jesse Lubinsky in connection with said work, which were calculated using his daily rate as a teacher on special assignment for only those hours he worked between June 26, 2017 and July 31st, 2017, which was $11,191.23. So that's the resolution.
Can I ask where the day rate came from with teacher on special assignment? Because according to the contract and according to the board, the day rate is what, the contractual rate is $269. And what work did he perform? So I just want to make sure the board understands what they're approving.
Sure. So the $269 is the curriculum rate, and we pay that's for summer pay for teachers doing summer work on curriculum development. So I would say the contractual rate is when we pay a teacher their contractual salary. So I'll give you another example. We have, when our teachers participate in special education CSE meetings in the summer, they get paid their contractual rate. They're there as teachers, and they're performing their teacher responsibilities sitting at that table. So they would get what's called the contractual rate. The contractual rate is the teacher's salary prorated. So the $269 number that you're referencing, that is only for teachers who are doing curriculum writing, lesson development. It's not for teachers working in their role as teacher. Does that make sense?
Actually, no, because the other FOIL request that I received, and Jesse went to the same conference that other teachers have been approved to go to, that those teachers received the prorated amount, but Jesse went on conferences, like I said, that were approved. One was approved in 2016, and one was approved the day after the job posting. So if there was a way to wait, or it's voluntary. Those conferences are voluntary. But those conferences, he was doing the same thing that a teacher would do when that we have sent other teachers on similar workshops. And we paid him significantly more. I just asked the board to consider looking into it a little bit more before you cast your vote. Because you are saying you believe that this is true, and you have done your due diligence in casting your vote before you make that vote.
Thank you, Ms. Lenz.
Presuming we don't. Presuming that we don't. Is that what I heard?
All right, so we'll return back to our motion for a executive session for the purposes of discussing the employment of particular persons. Could I get a motion?
So moved.
Could I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And we're going to continue our meeting in executive session.